Hey, what's up, folks? I'm International Master Kostya Kavutskiy, and today I'll be recapping the 2020 US Girls Junior Chess Championship. So this year, the US Championships is, of course, being run completely differently. Normally, these tournaments are held in person at the St. Louis Chess Club. But this year, because of the pandemic, of course, they are all being held online, which has actually been a blessing in disguise because it means these tournaments can run back to back. And all five of these events, the US Girls Junior, the US Junior, the US Seniors, the US Women's, and the US Championship, are going to be running back to back over the next couple of weeks here in October. So the other thing that's, of course, new and different about these tournaments is that they are using a rapid time control 25 plus 5 instead of course, the typical classical control. And to me, that makes me feel like the outsiders are going to have more of a chance when it comes to these events because rapid chess, and especially online rapid chess, tends to be a little bit more volatile. So we're definitely in for some really exciting action. That said, the US Girls Junior was actually won by the top seed, Carissa Yep, who has actually now won this event for 3 years in a row. She won in 2018 and in 2019, and she made it a hat trick with her third victory. She scored 7.5 out of 9 points and really did amazing in this tournament. Second place went to International Master Annie Wang with 6 out of 9, and third place went to Rochelle Wu with 5.5 points. So in this video, I wanted to share some of the highlights of the tournament, some of the most important and fantastic games. And one of the critical rounds actually took place in round 4 when the two top seeds were facing off. This was the top seed Carissa playing black against the number 2 seed International Master Annie Wang. And this was the first game of the second day. After day 1, Annie was actually leading the event with 2.5 out of 3. She started off really strong and was doing actually quite well in this position as white against Carissa, who was behind and needed to win to overtake Annie in the standings. And here black has a pretty difficult position. Black is down a pawn, and the d5 pawn is isolated and weak. And Carissa makes, I think, a very practical decision, one that I think is really instructive for most players out there, especially for rapid chess. She just plays d4, just gives the pawn up, opens up the bishop, because she understands that this bishop has to be unleashed, and if black is going to get any kind of play in this position, it's going to be by opening up the diagonal and hoping that she eventually finds some tactics. Now Annie, of course, takes the pawn, rook d8 is played, queen b3, bishop d5, queen b6. White is still, of course, completely winning, but at least now black has some hope in the position. And here white plays bishop takes d4, which I think the commentators immediately singled out as being a little bit unusual. Knight takes d4 felt like the natural choice, and indeed white has a completely winning advantage here. Now, this move was probably rejected by white because at some point, black might play queen g3 and threaten a lot of stuff around her king. Instead, she plays bishop takes d4, and now after bishop c4, it's already a little bit murky for white. Even though the computer still says white is totally winning here, it's already getting difficult, and as the time ticks down, it just gets harder and harder to play these positions. And I think Carissa really did a good job of making the most out of her practical chances in this tournament. She ended up winning a ton of games. Here white plays g3. This ends up being a very serious mistake. This is a pawn move that they can't get back, and now the long diagonal was just weakened for the rest of the game. Instead, something like rook f2, and white was still doing really well, but as you can see, it was already kind of an awkward position to play with just so many weaknesses in white's camp. After g3, queen e7, the players made some more moves, and black started reorganizing all of the pieces on the diagonal and was already having really strong initiative for the 2-pawn sacrifice. Eventually, black's initiative paid off, and after rook c6, black grabbed the pawn, rook c8, and now Carissa goes for the long diagonal, and these light squares just absolutely kill white. And the game is already very difficult for white at this point. Takes on c1, takes on b2. Here bishop c4 was immediately winning the piece and finishing the game. The players were, of course, in heavy time trouble, but Carissa just pulls the bishop back, and this diagonal just ends up being too painful for white, and she ended up winning this very critical game. Now, once Carissa grabbed the lead in round 4, she basically never let it go. She just kept winning lots and lots of games. And especially on her final day, she won all 3 of her games, starting with Women's Grandmaster Jennifer Yu, one of the strongest players in the field. And I was really impressed by this game because at this point, Carissa is half a point ahead of the field. This is round 7, so this round and then 2 more rounds to go. And in this position, Black plays a typical move G5 for this kind of Ruy Lopez Archangel type of position. And this move often gives White a choice, either play Bishop G3 and play against Black's kingside weaknesses, or just go for the immediate sacrifice with Knight takes G5 and play for the kingside attack. And despite being half a point ahead in the standings and maybe wanting to play it safe, Carissa just takes on G5. She felt like it was the strongest move in the position, and afterwards in the post-game interview, Carissa kind of explained it all and said that basically it's easier to attack in a rapid time control than it is to defend, and that's kind of what happens after HG. Bishop takes G5. I believe the best move and kind of only move for Black here is to go E takes D4, not just taking away the E3 square from White's rook, but also introducing the idea of bringing in the knight with Knight E5, and of course grabbing a pawn in the meantime and just trying to get more pieces into the defense. In the game, we saw king to G7, which allows White to play rook to E3, and now White's attack is quite strong, although it was misplayed a little bit by the players, but of course this was a rapid game, so they're obviously not going to be playing perfectly in these sharp situations. Here White played rook G3. I think it was better to first develop with knight to D2 and then bring the rook to G3. Because here Jennifer finds a really strong defensive move, bishop takes E4, not just grabbing an important central pawn, but finding a chance to bring the bishop to G6, where it can be a really good defender. After the move queen to D2, Black ends up making a mistake with rook to G8. Best was bishop G6, just kind of sealing the diagonal and basically inviting White to give up the dark squared bishop for Black's rook on F8, something like takes, queen takes F8, and Black would have 2 pieces for the rook and be doing really, really well. Instead, Black played rook to G8, which allowed White to take on F6, forcing king takes F6. And now after queen H6 check, bishop G6, and knight D2, Black's king is just kind of stuck out in the open, and White has a completely winning attack here with so many pieces ready to mate the king. Carissa finished it off really, really nicely here with D5, rook to E1, just bringing all of the pieces into the attack. Now on something like E4, White can play either knight takes E4 check, with the idea queen F4, king to G7, and queen takes F7. Very, very nice pin motive there, leading to checkmate on the H-file. Or White could also just play, I would say, the simple rook takes E4, where if Black goes D takes E4, we have knight takes E4 check, and the king is going to get mated very, very soon. After rook E1, king E6, White's attack just started to completely flood in here. Rook to E8 was played, bishop takes D5. And Carissa finds a really nice tactic at this moment after knight F5, nice combination, I should say, with the move rook takes F5. Now, the main point is that if bishop takes F5, White will have queen takes C6, checkmate, just mating Black's king in the middle of the board. But the nicer point is that after rook takes E3, trading rooks in between, and bishop takes F5, White still can take on C6 and is winning the rook in the corner, and that was it. White won all of the material back from the attack, plus a couple of extra pawns, and the game was just over. And that was really impressive to me, that despite being in a situation where any loss will be devastating for her tournament, Carissa still decided to take the risk, knowing it was probably the right thing to do in the position, and then justified her play with strong attacking moves to back it up. In the final game, Carissa needed to defeat one of her main rivals, WIM Rochelle Wu, and Rochelle actually makes a mistake in the opening, plays this move bishop e6 in the Najdorf kind of at the wrong moment, because now White pounces with knight to g5 and immediately takes advantage of Black's last move, hitting the light squared bishop and threatening, in case of bishop c8, a very annoying and very powerful move bishop c4, where Black just won't have any good way of defending the light squares. So Black had to give up the light squared bishop, and Carissa finds a pretty interesting way of putting pressure on the light squares with this a4, a5 advance, followed up by this move rook to a4 and securing the c4 square for White's bishop. Black had to play the unfortunate king f7 here just to defend the pawn, and now after the really strong move queen a1, White has ideas of playing queen a2 in every position and really just hammering down on this e6 weakness. I really like how white played this one. Knight c5, takes, castles, rook fd8, and now a really useful move, knight to e2, simply improving the knight and preparing this f4 break, which would just allow white to break through to black's position. The game did not last super long. Black tried to hold on here, but white's pieces just started flooding through. And then white found the nice tactic here with knight to d5, hitting both of black's pieces here. And then after knight takes d5, rook f7 check, winning the queen on c7. Takes, knight e3 was played. Bishop comes back to d5, b3 check, getting the queen in on the long diagonal, and then really nice simplification tactic, e5, allowing rook f1 check, allowing black to win back white's queen, but taking on d6 at the end and transposing into a completely winning endgame where white's bishop has a lot of targets to focus on, black's knight is hanging, and of course the d-pawn is a really, really strong pass pawn. The game did not last much longer. Carissa grabbed a couple pawns, brought the bishop back to d3, and here black decided to resign as the a-pawn is going to be way too strong for black to deal with in the position, and that was just game over. So Carissa finished with 7.5 out of 9 points, a huge performance. Like I mentioned, Annie Wang got second place with 6 out of 9. One of Annie's best games, I would say, happened against WFM Martha Samadishvili. In this position, playing black, Annie came up with really thematic sacrifice in this kind of knight R structure with the move d6, d5. Really instructive breakthrough in the center, just totally opening things up for black's position. Now, the first point is that if e takes d5 here, it seems like black doesn't really have enough to capture the pawn. The idea was probably to go either bishop to c5 or bishop to b4, one of these moves. And the point is that black is going to be taking on e3, winning back the d5 pawn, and then having a ton of pressure in the center and on the c file. For example, something like king h1, take on e3, queen takes e3, and now black can take on d5 either with the knight or with the bishop, or even play a move like bishop f5 here, and black has just fantastic compensation and is going to be winning back the pawn very soon. Instead, in the game, white decided to play knight c takes d5, black took, e takes d5, bishop c5, c4 was played to hold on to the extra d5 pawn, and here Annie played e4, just sacrificing a second pawn to open up her pieces and get some real initiative for her material. Now, the point on f takes e4 was likely to go queen f4, where black has ideas like knight g4 and rook e8 and bishop d6, and white's kingside is basically way too exposed here. Black has tons and tons of compensation for the two pawns. I think white should have still done this objectively. Instead, white played the move queen to e2, which anyway allows black to come in with ef3, rook to e8, knight e4, and now all of black's pieces really become super active, attacking everything in white's position. Queen e5 hitting the rook goes to b1 or a2, there's a knight c3 fork in the position. White tried b4 here, kind of a desperate attempt. Knight g5, nice response, hitting the queen, keeping an eye on this rook. And then after knight g4, white tried to make some tactics work, but all the tactics were in black's favor here, as black's pieces were very active, rooks were connected, and after queen takes a1, bishop takes g5, and he found the pretty simple but still very satisfying X-ray back rank trick with a rook to e1 and leading to a forced checkmate. So I am Annie Wang, also had a fantastic performance, but I gotta give shout out to, I would say, the move of the tournament. Hands down, for anyone watching the broadcast, I think it had to have come from this game. It always takes two to make a brilliancy, and so here we have WFM Sophie Suzuki against WIM Talia Cervantes. And in this position, Sophie plays the best move in the position, castles queenside. A really sharp move, but white had to connect rooks and develop the king, allowing black to grab on a2, but with the idea of pushing e5 and generating a ton of play using this pin. Objectively, this was quite strong for white, but Sophie unfortunately messes it up. Here, should have just taken on f6, and then after hg, f takes g7, white would be getting the better of things. Instead, we had a total mess after bishop h4, knight d5, check, bishop takes d8, bishop e3 check, king c2, queen a4 check. the game just got so wild here. Now, the first problem for white is that on king to b1, black can play knight takes c3 check, b takes c3, and then queen b3 with at least a perpetual check. It was clear that white was playing for the win here, so this was not something she wanted to allow. Instead, she decides to go king to d3. A very ambitious move, but objectively probably still justified. Black played rook takes d8 and lining up against the king. White, no fear, goes bishop to e4. And surprisingly, black actually doesn't have such a great discovery against white's king, because of course any knight move is going to undefend the bishop and allow white to play king takes e3. Instead, Talia goes queen to b5 check. White goes back, king c2, queen a4 check. And it seems like the players are repeating moves, and objectively, that is what should have happened here. At this point, white cannot do better than a draw. So really should have just played king d3 here and accepted the repetition, but Sophie very boldly plays for the win here with king to b1, just hoping for any final chance. But then this gives black a chance to strike. Talia does play knight takes c3, b takes c3, and queen to b3 check. Now, I believe the commentators here, myself as well, were kind of expecting her to just make the repetition. Both players were down to just seconds here, just no time on their clocks, complete scramble, 5-second increment. And the players did repeat a little bit after queen b3 check, king to a1. And then out of nowhere comes the move rook to d2. A total shock to me, the commentators, everyone watching. The thread is mate on the second rank here with queen b2 or queen a2. And after rook takes d2, bishop takes d2, even though black has only 2 pieces left, there's simply no good defense to the threat of bishop takes c3, meaning white is just going to have to give up a queen for this bishop and is totally lost. Something like rook to c1, black can take the rook, black can go queen a3 check, take the rook with check, and then is just completely winning here. So instead, white played rook to d1, but after takes, everything comes with check. All black needs to do is cover the back rank with a5, and the game was essentially over. So a really fantastic find by Talia with rook d2, especially given that she had seconds on her clock and was probably pretty happy with a draw based on how the position was going. But yeah, really amazing find. Nice display of courage when you're down on time, but you're still trying to do everything you can to win the game. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed the recap. If you want to check out any of the games, I'll leave a link to the Elite Chess Study below and you can check them out. And stay tuned for the US Junior Championship coming up starting on Tuesday, October 13th. That's going to be very exciting. Some of the best juniors in America and as well as the world that are going to be competing. And I'll be back for another recap at the end of that tournament. So until then, have a good one and take care.